Okay, well, welcome to the session on the MBA timeline. Thanks to GMAT Club, and we're part of Fortuna Admissions. This is an opportunity for you to learn everything there is to know about how to get your application done on time and with the greatest success possible as you're applying for MBA programs. So we hope you'll stick with us for a while to learn all of the tricks and trades and tips and hints on the how to build the strongest application possible for your MBA journey. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and we're looking forward to spending some time with you going over some of those ideas that'll make you one of the strongest candidates possible for your MBA. So just to get us started, talking today about the MBA timeline, the ideal roadmap for your MBA admission success in round one. So a little bit about Fortuna. We are a group of former admissions directors and associate deans and heads of admissions at some of the top schools around the world. We represent and have worked at schools such as HBS, Stanford, Fuqua, Wharton, Columbia, Kellogg. Most of the top schools you can imagine are members of our team. So we have lots and lots of experience working with applicants from all over the world, applying to many, many different kinds of schools. And we provide strategic guidance, feedback, and great application advice to help you really present the strongest candidacy possible for your admissions journey. And if you're interested in learning more about us, you can sign up for a free consultation where you'll talk with one of our coaches to learn a little bit more about your chances and the opportunities to work with us to really build the strongest application possible. So this is who we are. I'm Bill Kuzer. I've spent many, many years at Chicago Booth in a variety of capacities, including full-time admissions, part-time admissions, as well as executive MBA programs. I'm also a graduate of Booth and have worked with Fortuna now for about 5 years, helping candidates achieve success at many of their dream schools across the world. And Sharon, you want to kind of jump in with just a little bit of your background as well?
Sure. Thanks, Bill. Hi, I'm Sharon Joyce, and I've been doing admissions work in the MBA space for a very long time. I'm not going to give years anymore. I was at UC Berkeley's Haas School of Business for a number of years, and I also spent time working at Carnegie Mellon's MBA program, also in admissions and doing career services as well. And I love working with our clients, so I'm really glad to have all of you online ready to learn from us today.
All right, thanks, Sharon. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to walk through very briefly the key elements of the application, which most of you probably already aware of, an ideal application timeline, some thoughts on initial preparation and reflection, school research, recommendations, essays, resume, a few other considerations that you might want to also put into the mix, and then give you some time for questions and answers at the end so that we make sure that we are addressing the things that are on your mind, the concerns that you have as you think about the application process. So what are the key elements of the application? Again, I think most of you are aware of this. Clearly, test scores, transcripts, a professional resume, letters of recommendation, usually 2, sometimes 1, several essays, depending on the school, that may be anywhere from 1 to 3, a little bit of your extracurricular activities, and in most cases, an interview. And the interview is typically a little bit after the submission of the actual application, but is also an incredibly important part of the whole process. So let's talk a bit about the timeline. We suggested Fortuna 3 to 4 months, and you might say, why so long? That seems like an incredibly long period of time to be working on an application. And for sure, we have worked with clients where we have spent much less time on the application. I know I have had clients who've come to me and said, I've got 2 weeks before the deadline. Can we get something done? And we do our best and do what we can to make that application as strong as possible. But the more time you have, the more time we have to work together, the better that application is going to be. The stronger your story will be, the better you will be able to express who you are, your desires, your goals, the challenges you face throughout your life and your career. And your application will just be that much stronger if we have a significant amount of time to work together. So again, we suggest 3 to 4 months. And so for round one, that typically means starting sometime in May, maybe a little bit earlier, maybe a little bit later, but ideally, thinking about middle of May as the beginning of the application process. And as you can see here on the screen, the basic timeline we lay out is that May is this time of reflection and school research, thinking a little bit about who you are and what you want to do, as well as exploring the various schools that might be of interest to you, so you can eventually get down to a short list of those schools that you think you'd be most interested in and where you'll have the best fit. May, June, you'll be working on resumes and doing your testing if you haven't already. So making sure you've taken your GRE or your GMAT or your executive assessment. And if necessary, giving yourself some time to take it again. June focuses on recommendations and transcripts. Mid-June to July is kind of essay development, beginning the narrative, identifying the stories you want to tell. July and August is completing those essays and really honing those to the point where they're concise and focused and well written. August and September is the final review, and obviously September, in most cases, is the time to submit. So a couple of things to think about here as part of this is, again, thinking about testing. Sometimes that is a very daunting part of the process for many students, many candidates. If you have taken the test, that's great. If you are pleased with your score, that's even better. If you're not, you want to make sure you give yourself enough time in this process to be able to prepare for a second round or even sometimes a third round of testing to make sure you get the scores that you want, given the schools that you are shooting for. You also want to make sure that if there are other courses that you have taken to supplement the transcript from your university, if you're taking an extra math course or a course on leadership or management at some point, that course will be completed by the time that you actually submit your application. It's much more powerful to be able to say to an admissions committee, here's the course I have taken and here's the grade I received, as opposed to I am in the middle of a course and I'm hopefully going to do pretty well by the time it's all done. So the other thing to remember is that for many schools, they announce their new applications for the coming year in June or July. And in some cases, that means the questions from a year ago may change. So although you can begin working on essay development in early June, mid-June, there is a chance that when the new applications are released, that those essay prompts may change just a little bit. Admissions officers do get tired of reading the same kinds of responses year in and year out, so they do like to change up the essays. They also think that it's a great way to get a little bit different perspective on candidates. So again, sometime in June, when the new applications come out, you may see that the essays that you may be familiar with or that your friends have written will be a little bit different. So what's the key thing to get started with? And that is reflection. Who are you? What are you? And I'm going to turn it over to Sharon to talk a little bit more about that.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. I think that this is sometimes the hardest piece for our clients to wrap their head around, because I think at first blush, it seems like if you're applying to business school, it should be fairly straightforward. I'm just going to answer a question about why I want to get my MBA. But a lot of the schools are looking to make sure that they are bringing in a class of students who want to make an impact, not just on their careers, but on the world as well. I mean, think about some of the more famous essay prompts out there, like from Stanford, you have the prompt, what matters most to you and why? You can't really just sit down the night before an application is due and bang that one out. It really does take a lot of self-reflection. And when I have my debriefs with clients, when we're at the end of a cycle, I think one of the things that they don't realize at the start of the application process of how much introspection is going to be required of them. But at the end of the application cycle, they walk away, obviously happy that they are going to business school, but also really having a better sense of kind of who they are in the world and what they want to do with this degree. And so in terms of thinking about the reflection piece, there's a couple things to think about. I know within our practice, we do a leadership skills assessment with our clients to think about what are your areas of strength in terms of your leadership development thus far. But obviously, too, what are some areas for growth? And I think that that's really important as well, because your areas of growth really help you answer the question about why an MBA, why now? And then that will also help you in terms of reflecting upon the different schools that you are putting on your list and considering attending, in terms of looking at things that their curriculum might offer in terms of coursework to help you fill in some of those gaps. Also looking at extracurricular activities, co-curricular activities, again, that will help round out your experience and really lead back to that reflection piece that you've done in terms of why you are pursuing this degree and what you want to get out of it. So making sure that they have conferences, clubs, opportunities maybe for doing cool project work, things like that. And then also the community itself. I think that piece of self-reflection, you also need to think about, where am I going to be happy, not just for 2 years in terms of the education I'm going to receive, but also thinking about this network that you're going to become part of, because that is for life, in terms of thinking about classmates who might become future colleagues, people who you will lean on throughout the duration of your career. And so in terms of thinking about that self-reflection, I think it's really important to take some time to think, which is why Bill is saying we really want you to think about starting 3 to 4 months before you hit submit, so you have time to do that work of digging deep and really think about who you are. And then who you are, how does that really match and mesh to some of the schools that you want to apply to in the end? Because again, you will be asked questions like, what matters most to you and why? Haas has a question, what makes you feel alive when doing it and why? And so again, without having conducted some of this self-reflection, it's harder to answer those questions. Part of the self-reflection too is also about your career objectives. We also use a career workshop within our Fortuna practice to be sure that our clients have thought about being able to articulate what their short-term and their long-term career goals are. And this is important because when you are being reviewed as a candidate for admission into these top business school programs, they want to be confident and sure that you have a plan, you have an idea of what you want to do, and that it is something that is doable. It's doable based upon their offerings. It's kind of doable based upon your aptitudes and your resume to date, things like that, making sure that there's also a match there as well in terms of your career aspirations. And some of this can be tracked to the fact that some of the rankings are based upon career placement. And so schools, I think, do have, a little bit of some caution around making sure that they're going to bring students in who are going to be able to be successful at the end of attaining this degree and finding employment that is aligned with what they are looking for and aligned with what the school can offer. So again, in terms of thinking about that reflection, we really do want you to take the time to really tap into these different pieces in terms of your career goals, some of the strengths that you already have that you'll want to share with a committee, as well as some of the areas for professional growth and how that school will help you fill in some of those gaps. And then also too, thinking about the larger piece of your network for life as well.
Mhm.
So I think that that's about it for reflection. Bill, do you want to talk next a little bit about school research?
Yeah, let me add one more thing on reflection briefly, and this is again around career goals, Sharon, and that is one of the things I find many clients have the most difficult time doing is answering the question, why do you have the career goal that you have?
Mhm.
So it's one thing to say, I want to be a product manager in tech, or I'd like to be in private equity. Well, why do you want to do that? What impact do you want to have? What problem or issue do you want to solve? And oftentimes I find that requires a great deal of conversation and discussion and thinking about real motivations. And sometimes that's one of the hardest things, I think, for some of my clients to actually wrap their minds around.
Great point. Thanks, Bill.
So yeah, let's move on to school research. So you want to make sure that when you're applying to schools, one, you know where you're applying and what that school is going to do for you, and why that school might be an appropriate fit. So one of the things we like our clients to do, and we work closely with them, is to explore a variety of schools, to dig as deeply as they can into what that school has to offer, the basic educational approach of the school. Are they primarily a case-based school? Are they primarily a lecture-based school? Do they have lots of extra trips and visits and hands-on experiential learning programs? But really think deeply about what it is that you are looking for in a school. And we hope and we encourage students to go way beyond the rankings to think a little bit more deeply about what is going to make the experience worthwhile for you. So things like, where would you like to be? Would you like to be in a warm climate, in a cold climate? Does that matter at all? Is there a part of the country, part of the world that makes sense for you, given where you might want to go in your career? Is there a particular focus educationally that you're looking for? You have a particular career goal, and is there a school program that matches well with your desire to go into tech or go into finance or go into product management? So thinking deeply about what the school has to offer and what their success has been in helping students achieve those kinds of career goals. Are there particular faculty members that intrigue you in the kind of work that they do, whether that be in the latest ideas in economics or the latest ideas in artificial intelligence? Are there particular courses that speak to you in some way that may be in the direction of your career direction, but maybe simply because that's an interest of yours kind of extracurricularly outside of your career? And finally, I think one of the things we want to make sure you think about is what's going to be a good fit. There are many, many schools that will provide you a wonderful education that will prepare you well for whatever career you have in mind. But many of these schools have very different personalities. There's a different atmosphere. So here in Chicago, Kellogg and Booth, very, very good schools. Both of them can help you get many, many different places in your career, but they have different kind of characteristics and different senses on campus. So getting a sense of that and what fits with your own personality is going to be important. And how do you do that? Well, you certainly spend a lot of time on their websites. We would also recommend that you sign up for any online information sessions or webinars or lectures that they might offer. We also suggest that you try to get in touch with students and alumni from those schools. Not to bombard them with questions or take up all of their time, but to express your interest and to find out some of the key elements of what those folks thought about the school and why it was a good fit for them. And then through that, trying to determine which is going to be the best fit for you. You also want to make sure that you understand what the school is looking for and what their application process is going to be, and particularly looking for things like degree equivalents. And so if you have a 3-year degree rather than a 4-year degree for a U.S. school, that may be a challenge. But understanding that up front and making sure that you have all of the qualifications that school is going to be looking for, and so that you can either adapt to those qualifications or shore them up in some way if need be. So school research is very important. We want to make sure that the schools that you apply to are schools that are appropriate for you, that are going to help you achieve your goals, and that where you're going to feel comfortable and really enjoy the experience for the next couple of years. So Sharon, anything more on school research?
I would just say one thing, make sure, this might sound silly, but make sure you stay organized in the process. I know that I have clients who keep pretty meticulous Excel spreadsheets. Some people do just freehand journaling after they have an interaction with the school, but you definitely want to take notes, because later in one of your essays, you might want to give a specific quote that you heard a student say when you were visiting Wharton. Or if you're invited to interview, you might want to note a couple people who you met if you went to a women's weekend or something like that. So again, making sure that you're staying organized through the process of doing school research. And a little note on that too, though, Bill, I don't know if you have clients who have done this, but I've had a couple clients who have created just a very specific Gmail address that they use for all things related to MBA as well, so that it's kept in one specific area too, and it's not intermingling with their personal email, their work email, things like that. So that's something to also think about to stay organized in the process.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. Yeah. All right. Moving on to, we've got resume. And so the resume is an incredibly important part of the application process. And there is a slight difference in what we would consider a business school resume relative to kind of a broader CV that you might use for a job interview or something. And one of the primary differences is business schools like you to keep your resume to a single page. And we work very closely with our clients to make sure that we can fit all of that wonderful work that you've done onto a single page, and make sure that we get the highlights communicated to the admissions committee. So a couple of things to remember when you're putting together the resume. One, where possible, you want to quantify the results and accomplishments that you have, so that you can say, we reduce costs by X percent, or increase revenues by Y percent, or I manage 6 people, whatever it might be. Quantify wherever possible to show the actual accomplishments that you have had. Similarly, you want to demonstrate impact wherever possible. So what was your role and your responsibility in helping your organization move ahead? What did you do to lead a project, to manage other people, to save costs, to improve revenue, to come up with new ideas? So focusing on those things where you had a direct impact on the ultimate result of the company is incredibly important. And finally, you want to show where possible leadership and management. So if you have managed other people, if you have people reporting to you, you want to talk about that. If you've had a significant role in leading a project, in running an analysis, in leading a mergers and acquisition deal, whatever it might be, wherever you have the opportunities to demonstrate leadership and management, you want to make sure that that comes through on the resume, because those things are incredibly important when the business school comes to looking at potential candidates. We at Fortuna, again, the coaches will work closely with you to develop that resume, and we have on staff a resume expert that will also get involved in kind of making sure that your resume is the absolute best that it can be, communicates all the wonderful things that you have done throughout. And I guess one final thing is you want to make sure that your resume matches your LinkedIn profile. Assume you have a LinkedIn profile, you want to make sure that what it is saying and what your resume are saying are similar. Actually, they should be identical in terms of the actual career steps that you've taken, because many of the admissions committees will take a look at your LinkedIn profile along with your resume. So a little bit on a resume, very important. It does take some time, which is why we like to get that done fairly soon in the process. It helps prompt some of the other ideas that go on into your essays.
And Bill, just one quick note on resumes as well is that you'll have one resume that you can use for almost all of your programs, good one-page resume. However, some schools are a little bit picky about font size, presentation, things like that. And so again, why you want to start earlier is to make sure that you understand all of the requirements and what's being asked from you from different schools. And some schools are just a little bit pickier about how they want the resume formatted.
Right. Yeah. In particular, MIT has a very specific resume format that they ask that you use.
I wasn't going to name any names, but but it's out there. Yes.
Yep.
Friends at MIT.
All right. So testing, just very briefly on testing, you want to do the best you can. Whether you take GRE, GMAT, or executive assessment, you can work with a coach or others to kind of determine which is the best one for you. Just make sure that you give yourself time to prepare, and that if necessary, you have time to take it again if your score isn't quite what you want it to be. Your test score isn't the be-all and end-all to your application, but it is an important element, and you want to obviously do the very best you can. We work with clients all the time that have wonderful test scores, but also clients that have less than stellar test scores, and they can be successful in this process as well. It just requires a slightly different strategy and highlighting some other qualities that applicant will bring to the program. Sharon, recommendations.
I'll talk about recommendations. So letters of recommendation, these most schools at this point are asking for 2 letters of recommendation, but there are a handful of programs that only want to see 1 letter of recommendation. And I will say, letters of recommendation, I don't think sometimes clients initially understand how important they are in the review process. I know that when I was reviewing applications, sometimes I'd be really excited about an applicant, and then I would read the letters of recommendation and they would fall flat. And that was really a bummer, because I was so excited about a candidate on paper, and then these recommendations really did not add to that excitement. And by falling flat, some letters, it doesn't sound like the letter writer knows you that well. They use flowery adjectives, so they say nice things, but there's no concrete examples or key moments that they share. And so that's another way a letter of recommendation can fall flat. And it's a little bit tricky too, because sometimes is that a judgment reflection on you as the applicant that you did not choose more wisely, or that you did not prepare your letter writers to write strong letters of recommendation on your behalf. One thing that we do at Fortuna is that we do help our clients prepare letters of recommendation briefings that they will give to their letter writers to help refresh their memories of some of the key things that you accomplished while you were being supervised by someone or managed by someone. I want to be clear, we do not want you to write your letters of recommendation. And also, if you have a letter writer who says, oh, just go ahead and write something, I'll sign it, you want to move on. You want to find someone who is really excited, engaged, and wants to be a cheerleader for you throughout this application process. So I would choose wisely in terms of people who you feel will be dedicated to seeing you succeed in attaining your MBA dream. In terms of thinking about letter writers, particularly when you do have the opportunity to provide 2 letters of recommendation, I really encourage my clients to think about showing 2 sides of a coin, if you will. I think that you want to have one of your letter writers really talk about your intellectual aptitude, your quantitative abilities, your ability to be a problem solver, and that you are prepared to do well in an academically rigorous top flight MBA program. But just as you have someone kind of talking about all of your analytical skills, your quantitative abilities, your smarts, if you will, the other side of that coin, schools are more and more engaged too with also seeking to bring in a class of students who are also emotionally intelligent, people who are welcoming of diverse perspectives, people who will contribute to class conversations and group projects in a very thoughtful manner. And so making sure that your second letter writer can really talk to some of those things about your empathetic leadership, times where you were a good team player, as well as knowing when to step up and being a good leader. And so again, the 2 sides of that coin would be really the analytical skills, the quantitative abilities, as well as having that emotional intelligence piece is really important. Most schools have defaulted to using 4 questions. The first question is really just having the letter writer describe the basis of your relationship. It is helpful if they could add in anything about how many people they've supervised over their career, or, were you handpicked by them to be someone on this team that they manage. So I think that that's a useful little plug if you can put that in. And then the second question really gets at your salient strengths. What do you bring to the table in terms of your different abilities? The third question is a question about a time where you were given constructive feedback. And with that question, it's not just about the scenario in which feedback was provided to you, but admissions committees really want to hear that you are receptive to feedback, receptive to coaching. And then after that feedback, how did you process it? And did they see a change after you were given that feedback? So again, making sure that you're not super defensive in the face of feedback is really important for the letter writers to express in that question. And then a lot of schools also do have an optional, is there anything else you want to say about this candidate? Obviously, anytime you have an opportunity for someone to say more on your behalf, you definitely want them to do so.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes too, if the person who's writing your letter of recommendation is someone who has an MBA degree or maybe even has gone to graduate school, I think sometimes it's nice if they can talk about how they could see you being a really stellar classmate because of some of the things that you do within the workplace. I think that if they understand a little bit about your career aspirations and how that fits with that school, it's also nice for them to kind of fit that in as well. And think about, all of the components of the application. If there's anything that you are not able to say on your own behalf because simply you don't have enough space, sometimes it's a good way to kind of sneak in having a letter writer address something that you'd like to have addressed, if it makes sense and it reads authentically. So in terms of letters of recommendation, again, think about presenting 2 sides of a coin. And I do think sometimes too, it's okay if a letter writer reiterates one of the accomplishments that you might be talking about in one of your essays. If anything, it's only kind of showing evidence that you did have that key key achievement. I know sometimes I've had clients who are like, gosh, can they talk about that? I've already talked about it in the essay, and that's totally fine. But like I said, I think the most important thing is making sure that you do prepare your letter writers. So by giving them a briefing, you want to attach a resume. You might even want to give them a couple rough drafts of some essays that you've written so they get an understanding of what you're doing. And then obviously up-to-date resume, and then also a cheat sheet with some bullet points of some of the key things that you've accomplished while, again, you've been working with them or supervised by them. It sometimes is tricky for people who are self-employed or people who work for a family business. Particularly for the family business, please don't have your mom write you a letter of recommendation. It does not go over well with an admissions committee. But certainly if you have clients who could provide letters of recommendation, funders, things like that, those would be more appropriate choices. So I think that's about it for letters of recommendation. Bill, do you have anything to hop in with?
Just a couple of things. One, your recommenders are likely to be very busy people, just as you are. And so you want to make sure that you give them plenty of time to get their recommendations written. So again, providing with information, as Sharon was suggesting, but also not asking them to submit their recommendation with, deadline is tomorrow. Give them plenty of time to do it. And then a second thing is, I often am asked, well, I know so-and-so, or my cousin has a friend who is the CEO of so-and-so. So they've got this wonderful title. Does that matter? And the basic answer is no, it does not. In fact, unless the person knows your work well, having someone with a great title will simply fall flat and will not be the kind of recommendation that will serve you well. So think about who knows your work well rather than what their title is.
And I just want to say two more things. Sometimes with recommendations, sometimes clients are uneasy about letting their current workplace or their current supervisor know that they're going to possibly be leaving in a few months to go to business school. It is okay if you need to use sometimes a previous manager or previous supervisor from another job. But make sure that you do explain to the admissions committee why you're not using a current supervisor, and there is space within the application. Most schools will ask, if you're not using a current supervisor, please tell us why. And then just as Bill was talking about kind of courtesy up front in terms of giving your letter writers plenty of time to be able to put together your letter of recommendation, make sure you thank them and make sure you let them know what happens at the end of the process. I know when I worked at Haas, it didn't happen often, but sometimes we would have a recommender calling in to say, like, whatever happened, did they get in? That's not for us. We're not allowed to disclose that information. I know that with my clients, I calendar for my clients a thank your recommender, send them a bottle of wine, send them a Starbucks gift card, something to thank them for their time and effort to support your application.
Great. So next bit is transcripts. And again, very briefly, schools will ask for your records from any institution that you have attended. So you want to make sure you understand what the process is for getting those transcripts from your school, and that you can get yourself a copy and are submitting it in time. So many schools in the initial part of the application will ask simply for an unofficial version of your transcript, which you can upload and send on your own, but most will want an official version that will come from the school. So again, as part of the process, you need to go back to all the schools that you have attended, understand what the process is for getting an official transcript, so that when the time comes, you can have that sent to the schools that you're applying to. Again, it's not a difficult thing, but it does take a little bit of time and will take a little bit of research to make sure you understand the process that the schools will ask you to go through.
Bill, just two notes on transcripts, though, too. And again, this is why you want to start early to understand what different schools ask for. For students who are applying to schools, particularly in the US, sometimes the MBA programs want you to use a specific company to do the translation of transcripts. So make sure you understand what their requirements are. And then also for some students who have done study abroad, also checking with all of the different programs you're applying to see whether or not you'll need to provide a transcript from that study abroad program, or with all of those credits with grades are on your home school transcript, whether or not that will be acceptable as well. So there are some funky nuances to transcripts. So again, make sure that you read the directions essentially on the school's websites, because different schools have different requirements for some of the transcript information.
Great. All right. Essays. Sharon, what should we say about essays? This is the most daunting part of any application for most applicants. So
I think, though, part of why we really press on our clients to think about doing that reflective piece is that once you've done all of these different reflection pieces in terms of leadership skills assessing, career visioning, things like that, by the time it comes to writing the essays, you have a lot written, at least with us, because we've had you go through a curriculum. But I think one of the biggest things is making sure that you are answering the question that's being presented, right? And making sure you really kind of worked with your coach or thought about it in terms of like, what is the school really trying to learn about me from this essay prompt? And I think that one thing that we also want to kind of give as a cautionary tale, like you'll have kind of a shell that you'll use for multiple schools, because obviously your career goals are probably not going to change too much among the different programs for which you're applying. But it's also when we've been on the other side of the table reading essays, it's really frustrating when you're reading an essay that for sure they were using it for another school and kind of shoehorning it in for the prompt that we're looking for. So again, making sure that you really are paying attention to what that prompt is asking and making sure that it really does get to the letter and spirit of what that particular school is looking for. Bill, what else would you want to say on this?
well, a couple of things. One, I'm often asked, well, how many drafts do you think I'm going to have to go through on my essay? And so do we do this twice? Do we do this 3 times? And it all depends on your comfort level in writing and how skilled you are in writing, and how much of that reflection you have done ahead of time. So I have had clients who've, after about 3 rounds, it's in pretty good shape. I've had others who we go much more than that. So again, that's why the timeline can be as long as it is. It'll take, if you really want to get that essay to where it really sings to the admissions committee, you're going to spend some time on it. And we are going to push as coaches to make sure that it does all those things. So just be prepared that if you're working with someone like us, you're going to get a lot of pushback and, well, how about this? And remember that, and make sure you kind of get all those pieces in. And it may take 5 or 6 or more drafts before you're actually happy with it.
And we would also caution, please stay away from ChatGPT and AI to write your essays. It's funny, some of us took a little quiz to see if we could detect what essays were written by AI versus what was written by an applicant. And we did very well on the quiz because we've been doing this for a long time. And, my takeaway from, essays that I've read that have been AI generated is they have a brain, but they don't have the heart and soul, which is what the schools are looking for. And again, thinking about what we said in the reflection piece, these are big questions that schools are asking in terms of what matters most and about you and why, what makes you kind of tick up and beyond what they are gleaning from you in terms of looking at your resume, looking at things that your letter writers say. The essays, as Bill and Guy just said, what makes, what will sing to an admissions committee in terms of having some sort of emotional connection to the person who is reading your essays. And just to give a little perspective, when I was reading applications at Berkeley, I would read 30 applications a day, 3 days a week, starting in October and ending in May. So reading about 2,500 to 3,000 applications in a cycle, there's some fatigue on the part of the essay reviewers. And so making sure that you really find a way to appeal to the person on the other side, having some sort of emotional connection to what they're reading on paper about you.
The other thing to remember is that most folks will focus on kind of the 2 or 3 primary essays when they think about essays. But remember, as you go through that application, there are other, what I call hidden essays throughout the application. It may be give me 150 words on your career goal, or it may be, tell me a little bit about this extracurricular and why it's important to you. Those are important written elements of the application as well. They may not take as much time or be as elaborate as the 500 or 1,000 word essay, for example, for some schools. But they are important that you write them well. So make sure as you're going through the application process that you understand all of the questions that are going to be asked throughout the application, and are prepared to spend a little time crafting those responses in a way that, again, is going to present you in the best possible light. All right. Extracurriculars. Sharon, you want to jump in and chat a little bit about how to think about that?
Sure. Again, schools where they're going to ask, what do you do outside of work? What did you do outside of your university experience? And some schools will ask, tell us about 2 of the most important college activities. Tell us about 2 things you've been doing since graduating. Some schools let you list, up to 10. And so again, it's making sure that you understand the directions. With extracurriculars, I think that they're looking to see, what do you do kind of outside of your work? What did you do outside of your university studies to show that you're a world citizen, to show that you care about what's happening in the world around you? And I think it's useful too if you have extracurriculars that obviously are driven by some of your interests that you're talking about, maybe even for your career. Like if you're someone who wants to do an MBA, MPH, maybe you did some volunteer work around women's health issues when you were in college, or it's something that you're doing in terms of tutoring because you're interested in ed tech. So I think sometimes too, if your hobbies, your interests, things like that also mesh with some of your career interests, I think that that's super useful, and it just makes your story even more compelling. I do have sometimes clients who feel like, gosh, I just don't have a huge laundry list of things. That's fine. I think schools are actually more impressed if they see that you've had a sustained relationship with an organization or a sustained hobby or interest that you've been doing for a long time. Within this, though, too, when you're talking about your extracurriculars, it's okay to also list things that are just pure hobbies, too. I have a client who is a huge baker. She does it for friends. She does it for fun. And she wrote really beautifully about how that kind of gives her some peace and presence. And so it's okay to write about things that are not necessarily formal organizations as well. But again, schools are looking to have well-rounded students. And so they're not going to be particularly impressed by people who just went to school and got good grades, and they go to work, they do well at work, and then they go home. They really are looking to bring in a class of students who have diverse interests, diverse ideas, and that are going to contribute also to the clubs and activities at those schools as well, because that's also a really important part of the student experience, is having students who are ready to shoulder the mantle of leadership in all of the different clubs and activities that business school programs are really proud of hosting. The one thing that's a little bit tricky, though, too, if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of extracurriculars, probably jumping in to do something 3 months before you hit submit is going to be pretty transparent to a committee that you're just trying to get some sort of resume fodder. And if that's not you, that's okay, but maybe spend more efforts making sure then that you have really, really good spot on essays, that your letter writers are really going to talk about what you contribute within the work environment, things like that. I wouldn't try to sneak something in for the sake of sneaking something in to have some fodder for your applications. Bill, any notes on that?
Nope. You hit the last one that I was going to make sure we hit on. Admissions committees know very clearly when you are just putting something on there to pad out the resume. So avoid that. All right. Interview prep. So if everything else has gone well, you've been invited to interview. Interview prep is something we also help with. It's something that, again, regardless of whether you're working with a coach or on your own, you need to spend time thinking about, how am I going to respond in an interview? They're out online. There are all sorts of sample questions that schools often ask. You should make sure that you have answers prepared. You should make sure that you can, that you know your own application backwards and forwards, that you understand what you've put on your resume, that you know what you've written in your essays. Some school interviewers will have your entire application package. Others will not. They may just have a resume. But regardless, you need to be intimately familiar with all those things you've just spent months putting together. And you should prepare. That does not mean you memorize. That does not mean you write out a script, but rather that you have ideas and specific examples that demonstrate the points you want to make. So if someone's asking you about, why did you take this job? you have a specific example about that. Or if somebody asks you, can you tell me about your greatest accomplishment? You have an example of what you can talk about. If someone asks about, tell me something about a time when you managed other people and it did not go well, you have an example to share. So having examples and an idea of the broad kinds of questions you're likely to be asked is very important. And spending a bit of time, a few days at a minimum, and ideally a couple of weeks, thinking about what kinds of questions might come up, practicing them aloud with friends or with coaches, also incredibly important to make sure that you do your best when the time comes to actually sit there across from an interviewer.
One thing too to note, though, we're seeing a lot more schools moving to also doing video interviews where you will go on and be asked, rotating questions. Some schools will give you the questions in advance, and you will do a recording that then is uploaded within the application. And so you also need to prepare for those as well. Those, I think, sometimes they feel a little weird, right? Because you're just talking to your computer screen and recording it. But again, I think Bill and I were discussing this the other day with the use of ChatGPT and AI in essay writing, which we have told you not to do. But I think that schools are going to start adding more components of having some video components so that they can kind of see and hear you speak extemporaneously off the top of your head. And so just do know that these are being added more and more. And so you'll probably start encountering those, at least with a few of the schools that you're planning to apply to. And I see more and more schools adding them as we kind of move on down the road in this kind of AI space.
Great. All right. So we've run through the basics of the presentation. As I said earlier, if you'd like to learn more about Fortuna and the work that we do, sign up for a free consultation. We'll be happy to walk through our process as well as kind of give you a sense of how we think you might fit with us and the kinds of things that we do. You see the links there on the screen as to how you can get in touch with us. But now let's open it up for some questions and see what's on your minds and how we can be helpful in helping you think through the application process.
If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Bill, there's a question here. I think we covered it, but maybe if they popped in a little bit late. Is it fine if you get recommendations from former employers?
Yes. Again, schools will typically say, we'd love to have your recommendation from your current supervisor, but sometimes that's not possible. Or even if it is, your second recommendation may come from a former supervisor, former coworker at another employer, which is great. Again, they could provide a different perspective. And in my mind, the most important thing is, did this person work closely with you and for an extended period of time? That's kind of the critical aspect of all of this. And if they have, then having one recommender from your current employer, one from another employer in your prior life is perfectly fine.
Great. I'll take this next question. What's the most asked questions in these interviews for the top MBA schools? I think that there are a couple different flavors. I mean, the first flavor is sort of kind of questions that you should anticipate. So why an MBA? Why our program? Why now? So making sure you've done your school research, right, so you can ask answer those specifics about that program. Schools also, though, will also bring in some behavioral based questions. So tell us about a time where you were on a team and they failed to meet a goal. Behavioral based questions are asked because how you tackled something in the past has some predictability of how you'll perform in the future. And so they'll want to hear about a scenario where you kind of walk them through a situation. But also what's really important about behavioral-based interviews is, what did you learn from that experience? And so being able to show some self-awareness, some self-reflection. And so be sure that you also practice behavioral-based questions. So again, overall, kind of the general why an MBA, questions that are very specific about why our program, and then some behavioral-based questions. And then some schools might even ask questions about current events. Some schools might ask questions about what you know within a particular career space. If you said that you want to work in tech, being able to talk a little bit about tech would be important. Bill, anything else in terms of general questions?
No, that's really it. It's kind of goal questions, school questions, behavioral stuff. And again, Interviewers are all very different. Some schools have very structured interview processes, others do not. And you may get an interviewer that just is interested in your extracurriculars, and you'll spend a good bit of time talking about why you are a mountain climber. It could go in many different ways, and you need to be prepared for that, and not be overly shocked if the interview doesn't go exactly the way you think it's supposed to.
It is useful, and you'll usually find out, a few days at least beforehand who you'll be interviewing with. If you're meeting with professional admissions staff, normally they will have read all of your applications, so they might ask you very specific questions from something you said in an essay. If you are meeting with an alum of the program or with a current student, generally they are not allowed to read your application, and so usually they just have a resume, and so they'll start off with some questions from your resume as well. So again, make sure that you have reviewed all of your materials before interviewing. Let's see, Bill. Hey, Bill, how do gap years affect the application selection process? How is it perceived by the application team?
The simple answer is it depends. What did you do during the gap year? If you sat around and played video games, it's probably not a big strength. If you did something interesting, if you took a course, if you traveled the world, if you trained for a marathon, I mean, what did you do? And how did that make you an interesting candidate for the school? That's the key thing. How basically the whole application process and what you're trying to convey to the admissions committee is that I'm an interesting candidate. I'm going to contribute to your school in interesting ways, and I'm going to do well in my career. And ultimately, that will reflect well on you as a school. So what you've done in a gap year can be incredibly important and useful in your application and set you apart from other applicants if you have done something interesting that sets you apart, that helps strengthen skills, helps shore up weaknesses, that just does something that nobody else has ever done.
So we have a question asking about, can you please shed some light on diversity consideration parameters in round one applications? I think what that question is asking is it better strategically to shoot for round one, which is what our presentation was geared for today, versus round two or round three? Bill, what do you think about that?
Well, round one, I think in most cases, people will like to see applications in round one. It expresses some interest in the school, and it gives you a little bit more time. I mean, a lot of round two applicants are applying in round two, either because they didn't get in where they wanted to in round one, or because they hadn't really thought about the MBA until a little bit later in the process, and they didn't have enough time to get into a round one application. Round two typically has a pretty good track record, so you're not at a tremendous disadvantage in round two. But I think for most candidates, they'd like to at least get some applications into round one just because they want to get that process going, and we would encourage that, largely because people start thinking about this process around now. And if you're beginning to think about the process now, that gives you plenty of time to get in for round one. And again, then you have another process or a fallback process for round two if need be. So
I agree with that. I mean, I think if you can shoot for round one, some of it is also just kind of a mechanism of there's like no seats have been offered out yet. So statistically speaking, there's more seats available. I also did kind of see though, between round one and round two, I think that there's sometimes a little bit more bandwidth as a round one applicant though, too. If you're a candidate who they're potentially on the fence, I think you have a better shot of being waitlisted into round two versus just outright denied, right? Because these schools are going to be cautious in terms of cutting too many people because they're not sure what's coming down the pike in terms of, are they going to have a bumper crop of applicants in round two? Or are they going to be in a lean application pool for round two? And so I just think strategically round one, if you can get things done, get it done, get it submitted. And I think it also just indicates, again, like Bill was saying, that you kind of have had your act together. You've been thinking it for a while. You're organized, you're prepared, and you want to get your materials specific, get them submitted. And then someone was asking a question about essay length. Have no fear, the schools are very strict about word count. Also being careful to pay attention, are they asking for word count? Or are they asking for character count? And some schools, you cannot go over that count because you have to put your essays into a text box within the application that does have a word counter on it. So again, making sure that you're paying attention to those rules as well.
There are a couple of schools that do not have a maximum number of words listed, although I'm certain in the back of the minds of the readers, they have a maximum number of words that they want to read. So if a school says, at least 250 words, that probably suggests you shouldn't be going over about 500 at most. And in the past, there have been a couple of schools where there was no word limit whatsoever. And some of those essays got to be quite lengthy. And we would work very closely to try to get them down to a reasonable length to make sure that your reader actually reads the entire essay and doesn't kind of get halfway through and say, this is too much, I'm moving on.
This question, so the focus GMAT has moved away from the AWA. Do we still have to focus on essays? Apologies, pretty new to understanding the format. I think in the past, at least I know when I was reviewing, we didn't normally put a lot of emphasis on that anyway. We really were driven first and foremost by the quantitative score to make sure that you can do the math that's required, and then looking at the verbal score. And so the essays, though, as we were saying earlier in this presentation, I mean, it's really your way of sharing with the admissions committee who you are up and beyond what you're already going to glean from your resume, work experience, letter writers. And so I think that that's really your platform to show and demonstrate who you are. And again, one thing that Bill was talking about and something that we emphasize is it's not just the what, though, it's the why. And so making sure committees understand your motivation for doing the things that you do and finding a way to connect with whomever is reading you on the other side of the screen. Right. This was a question about applicants who are more, are you kind of older applicants, 6 years of work experience? I think initially when Bill and I were talking about this presentation, I mean, most schools want applicants to have a minimum of about 2 to 3 years of work experience, but 5 years of work experience tends to be the sweet spot. So 6 years certainly isn't going to be anything that's detrimental. I think once you start hitting it, and Bill, you can let me know whether or not you agree with this, but once you start getting around 8, 9, 10 years of experience, you might be better suited thinking about an executive MBA program.
Yeah. I mean, there are overlaps. I'm thinking about full-time MBA programs, part-time evening MBA programs, and executive MBA programs. They do have distinct age and experience profiles. There's a little bit of an overlap, but if you think about full-time kind of being somewhere between 2 and 6 years of experience, and part-time programs, evening programs being kind of the 3 or 4 to maybe 8 years of experience, and then executive programs are going to be 8 and beyond. So again, working through your school research, working with a coach, working with others to kind of figure out where, given my profile, given what I've done in my career, how old I am, the things that I've done, and where I want to go, figuring out what kind of program is the right one for you it can be incredibly important and will have an impact on whether you are admitted or not. So a 45-year-old, and I've had some of these, 45-year-old applicant to a full-time MBA program is going to have a tougher time making that sell. It is possible. I've seen it done. But a 45-year-old applicant to an executive MBA program will be pretty much right in the sweet spot. So depending where you are in your career and where you want to go, the type of program you are applying to can vary tremendously.
Thanks, Bill. Well, everyone, it has been so great to chat with everyone today. Thanks for the questions. And we are at time. And so if you want to follow up, just find us at info@fortunaadmissions.com. Again, that's info@fortunaadmissions.com. And you can schedule a free consultation. Thanks again so much for your energy, and good luck to everyone. Aim for round 1. I think that's our
right.
way, right, Bill?
That's absolutely round one is the target right now. So good luck to everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate
Thanks
it.
for hosting us, GMAT Club. Bye-bye.